Just when you thought it was safe to go out again, Europe's sovereign debt crisis is back. Spain's governing party gets trounced in local elections. Fitch cuts Greece's credit rating, and Standard & Poor's threatens to downgrade Italy. With us now from London to consider the situation is our newest contributor here at Bloomberg, Niall Ferguson, the Tisch Professor of History at Harvard and visiting professor at the London School of Economics, as well as best-selling author of books including The Ascent of Money. So, Niall, the worst electoral defeat for the Socialist Party in more than 3 decades in Spain, it seems a very, very harsh public repudiation of austerity measures. What does this tell you about the future of the euro and the European Monetary Union if the Spanish can't get behind budget cuts?
Well, it confirms my view that the Eurozone has become a kind of government-killing machine, and that most governments right now who have been incumbent over the years of the financial crisis are being punished. And this, of course, applies not just to those on the periphery that are in trouble, the notorious pigs, but in fact it's been happening in the core, Germany. And I think this is going to continue, and it's a really very troubling situation with implications for the whole global economy.
Implications certainly for the whole global economy. Neil, how does it play out, or how do you expect it to play out? If you look back at similar, I don't know that there are similar situations. There was never a European monetary union before. But consider history for a moment and try to guesstimate, if you will, how this is likely to play out. As you point out, Angela Merkel's governing party in Germany can't hold on to its lead in local elections. So if all of these governments are losing support across Europe, where does it go?
Well, there was one precedent for this. In the late 19th century, there was a Latin monetary union, which died a slow death, mainly because of Italian deficits. And this was always my expectation, that it would be Italy that would drive the Eurozone off the cliff. In fact, I was a little wrong about that, and the problems began in Greece, in Ireland, in Portugal. Now they threaten to spread to Spain. But now Italy is in the frame, so we can't talk about pigs anymore. We have to say pigs in order to make room for Italy alongside Ireland. You know, as the political situation deteriorates in nearly all of these countries in the Eurozone, I think we're going to see political opportunists in opposition parties saying we have to do things differently. In the core, in the virtuous north, we're going to get more of those true Finn type parties saying enough with bailing out the people down south and out west. And in the periphery, we're going to start hearing people saying, look, this is nuts. We're inflicting masochistic austerity measures on ourselves. It's time to get out. And I think the idea of leaving the Eurozone, which is the most dangerous idea actually, is going to start surfacing as a politically credible one. So the outlook for the rest of this year is more trouble if you happen to be in power, and the temptation if you're in opposition to propose radical solutions, including conceivably exiting the Eurozone altogether.
Neil, what you just described there sounds like a recipe for the collapse of the European Monetary Union. At this point, does it feel to you like it's beginning to be more of a foregone conclusion, or something that still could be salvaged, possibly with the installation of someone like Christine Lagarde at the head of the IMF?
Well, certainly it's pretty important that we have a big-hitting European in that body, because the IMF has played a key role in trying to stabilize the sovereign debt crisis right the way through. But I'm not sure that that's necessarily going to suffice. Remember, one of the problems we have right now is that a European, Monsieur Jean-Claude Trichet, is in charge of the ECB, and he is making life very, very difficult for those people who would like to see some kind of restructuring, if not default, on the part of the Greeks. And it's the opposition and indeed tension within Europe that is making me more and more nervous. The Europeans themselves can't seem to get their act together to come to terms with the reality that the Greeks can't possibly manage this vast debt that they've accumulated. And probably the Portuguese and Irish too will have to do something in order to reduce their debt burdens over the short term. But if the ECB is against that, it doesn't really matter what the IMF does. We're heading towards a kind of Euro gridlock. And I think the stakes are much higher than many of the politicians who are so focused on domestic political issues seem to realize. On a recent trip to Spain, I met Mr. Zapatero. He seemed quite resigned to electoral disaster this year. He's an outgoing prime minister. He's not going to run for re-election. And when I was in Berlin a week ago, I was really struck by the atmosphere of complacency about this crisis. It does seem to me as if the German government, which is the key player in all of this, isn't really prepared to write a big check for Greece or anybody else. So I think the crisis is actually in many ways worse than many people realize, and the possibility of an orderly solution is getting lower and lower.
Concerns over European sovereign debt are roiling global markets yet again, and we're talking about them with Harvard professor Niall Ferguson, our newest contributing editor, with us from London this morning. Neil, you were saying to us before the break, having been to Berlin, you can see the complacency among the German population and possibly the politicians as well. In Spain, the Prime Minister, Zapatero, seems to have given up because he's not planning to run for re-election. And there's only so much a new head of the IMF can do to get his or her hands around the situation. So does that mean that European bailouts have politically failed, that there isn't the will to enforce or the public will to abide by austerity, and in the case of those handing out the money, not enough interest to see things through?
I think that's a pretty good assessment, Eric. You know, if you think back now over a year to when this crisis really began, there have been all kinds of measures, bailouts here and bailouts there, and nothing has worked. The spreads have continued to blow out, the PIGS borrowing costs have continued to rise, and austerity measures have failed to deliver the planned reductions in deficits. So it's very clearly not working. And yet the political will to go the extra mile, for example, to make a bigger bailout for Greece doesn't seem to be there in Germany or indeed in any of the core countries. And more importantly, it's proving very difficult indeed to work out some kind of way of, as this is the euphemism, by the way, of reprofiling Greek debt, which is just a fancy word for rescheduling. I think that's really the key issue. Unless something can be done significantly to reduce Greek debt burdens, and I think this would apply to other countries too, in the near term, then they're going to default. And this will be disorderly. So the pressure is really on, you would have thought, for the European politicians, not to mention the central bank, to get its act together. And yet I don't see signs of it happening. And this is really the thing that made me so nervous a week ago when I became super risk averse. It's the lack of any determination to act in Europe that is most troubling. These problems are not enormous, Eric. The Greek economy is small, and in relation to Eurozone GDP, its deficit and debt really aren't that large. But this is primarily a political failure of will we're dealing with. And it could have massive economic consequences, not only in the Eurozone, but right around the world.
Neil, how does it evolve? Does it continue to play out in slow motion, or at some point does the train wreck accelerate and we really begin to see, as you put it, some disorderly consequences, more immediate, let's say?
Well, I think that's what tends to happen in financial crises. You have a slow burn. People see that the figures don't add up. They see that there's a problem, but there's a kind of collective denial about just how bad it could get. And then suddenly expectations shift and there's a real exit from the bond market. And I have a sense that this is coming soon. In the absence of any credible plan to stabilize the situation, and in the absence of leadership from the IMF, and with the ECB basically saying, we're not going to help you sort out this Greek mess with a reprofiling, I don't see how much longer we've got before there is a major disorderly wind-up of the Greek situation and a contagion that could spread as far afield as Spain and Italy. Now, if you think in those terms, this could become really very big indeed. And I've been saying for a while now that the danger exists that we have a 2008-sized event, this time in Europe.
Neil, I'm afraid we have to jump. A bit of a dim version of the near future from Niall Ferguson. We're back.